Hey guys, and welcome back to another ZBrush speed sculpt video. And for today's video, we're going to be playing with a Spore creation model. So what I've done here then is I've taken an old Spore creation and I've exported it from Spore, done a bit of a, fancy jiggery with a FBX converter, of which I'll always link in the video description down below, imported it into ZBrush, just with the overall goal of sort of redefining it. Basically, adding in a whole ton of details, my own custom textures, just really making a Spore creation pop out into like its next stage in evolution, if you will, into this big awesome model. For my Spore creation I've chosen, I've actually gone ahead and used my very first ever completed creation. Sort of actually, it's kind of based on it. Some of you may remember the two-legged squiggle that I actually remade in Sculptures as well a long time ago. That was the cell stage variant, which then evolved into the horned Raptor, which was this incredibly terrible and extremely skinny monstrosity. I did not know how to scale parts at the time. So I was using that creation, and in about 2018, 2019, somewhat fairly recently, I then remade that said old creation again in Spore to something a bit more, anatomically plausible, something that actually has, a bit of meat on its bones and such, and I'm taking that creation and imported it into ZBrush. As for why did I do this? Well, just a bit of fun, to be honest. It definitely was just a bit of fun. I personally find that there's just definitely a charm to kind of to remaking Spore creations in ZBrush. And whenever I've done it in the past, such as with the Jowie and the Pokey, those two are remade them entirely from scratch, and that is something I really enjoy doing. But for this one, I just wanted a nice quick exercise, something very laid back, very simple, and also something that a lot of you guys can take part in as well. You can absolutely do this, whether in ZBrush, in Blender, maybe in Sculptures. I know Sculptures can be a little bit, crashy at times, but I think you can do it in Sculptures as well. Like I said, something that you guys could actually take part in as well. And so yeah, I thought it'd just be a bit of a nice warm-up exercise, something really nice and chill. Now, as for actually making the model itself, or kind of like redesigning in ZBrush, the very first thing I wanted to do was to detach all of the horns, or the teeth, or the keratin parts, and basically I cropped them out, I masked them, and I used a split tool in order to completely separate them, and then make them their own entities. That way they can have their own, clear defined colorations, but also they can be a different material. So at this stage right now that everything is pretty much smoothened out, everything's all polished, the horns are separated, we've got some nice big eyes, we're now at the point now where I can finally actually start sculpting on the creature. Still trying to go moderately low res, but still high enough where the information of the Spore creature itself, still comes through. And to add to all of the additional new information and general shape and such, I use the Sculptures tool, or the Sculptures feature. That way I can keep on adding in more and more polygons as I sculpt, add in more definition, really emphasize certain areas such as the lips or the tip of the mouth, without increasing overall resolution and making things, just be a bit overkill. So you can see, I spend a lot of time kind of working on the mouth here and the head. So of course, I didn't want it to be, anything amazingly realistic, but I was having a really hard time settling with the face or the shape of the snout, because on this Spore creation, the snout is extremely round and it has this kind of weird curvature. You could compare it to that of a Dilophosaurus with its little nose crests, but it still isn't quite the same though, because the Dilophosaurus has the crest coming out, whereas on the Spore creation, its snout is just simply very tall and very round and kind of bulbous. So that took a lot of back and forth. Also the shape of the lips itself. This wasn't done with any references at all, just purely by my imagination. Again, meant to be very laid back, very much for fun. So I was going back and forth around the head a lot, really trying to strike that balance I was happy with. I got there in the end, a bit of trial and error is always a good thing to have. Speaking of trial and error as well, and generally fixing things, also a bit of a thing that Spore has, which I'm sure we're all very familiar with, is the fact that the limbs are very bulbous, especially where parts like the shoulders and hips meet the body. They're very bulbous, very wide, very comical. So in this sculpt, I was able to spend quite a lot of time just adding a bit of muscle definition, as well as shaving off a lot of the shoulders and hips. That way they just formed better into the rest of the body, and as a result as well had to try and emphasize the curvature of the spine a little bit more, had to make the entire tail significantly larger because, again, Spore creation, the tail was just really weird and thin and kind of stiff, so I had to make that just a little bit longer, quite a bit wider, especially around the base, and kind of give it that classic, dinosaur pelvic area, or a pubis area more like, which gave it a lot of weight and overall just made it feel not realistic, but just a bit more believable. I definitely did not make this realism in mind, so you're going to see a lot of features that are just completely off. But again, that's the magic of it being, you know, based on a spore creation. That's what I really liked about this. I personally really like artwork based on spore creations because they just have such a charm to it. And it was that same charm I was trying to establish here, where it's not too realistic, but it's still cognitive. You still understand what's going on. It's not like something completely abstract. It's still something, you know, somewhat vaguely plausible. It's hard to describe. Like I said, I find that spore art just has such a charm to it. I really was trying to get that here. So after giving the tail some much needed adjustments, the next thing I did was kind of move around the limbs a little bit, overall made them all a lot thinner. I kept the hands the way they are, even though they're kind of a little bit strange compared to the feet. For the spore creation, it's got these big mammalian, kind of like lion paw feet, but then it's got these really strange stick-like reptilian hands. It's a bit of a strange kind of contrast, but I did keep that going though, because I wanted to keep it, not to mention, you know, the feathered wings on the scaled creature. I tried to keep those features intact, but for the limbs were just very bulbous. Again, just a thing about Spore. So went ahead and narrowed those down, especially the shins, the knees, and the around the feet area, the angles. And after all that, and after all, you know, the muscle definition, all that kind of stuff, it just came down to just, you know, adding overall more mass, more noise, more information, making sure the body was, you know, the way I wanted it to be. You definitely can see some very stark differences between my model so far and the original clay one to the left. You can see especially like how around the body, around the hips in particular, the legs, and especially the head, of course. But like I said, it's really cool to see the differences in how they kind of differ. In fact, another thing as well is the wings. So the wings are feathered wings. I do have techniques as to how to make like very cartoonish feathered wings. I decided to skip all of that, and I did go with what is arguably a very lazy route, and essentially basically just turn the wings into like one large single mesh with these, you know, very large bulbous shapes, which are meant to be like very vaguely defined feathers. I kept the wings intentionally very simple because one, again, it's meant to be a simple sculpt. It's not meant to be anything too, you know, extravagant. I didn't want to spend too much time on it, and two, I did want to keep that cartoonish feel. I did want it to be, you know, sort of recognisable as a Spore creation. As much as I do enjoy doing big feathered wings, or at least, you know, more cartoonish ones, I did feel like that if I gave the wings, you know, that much attention and really made them properly feathery, or at least, you know, defined every bit of different feathers in the inner part of the wings as well as the outer parts, it probably just would have been too much detail, too much information, and probably would have made it stick out a bit too much compared to the rest of the model. So you could definitely argue it's a bit of a cop-out. I did kind of cheap it out a little bit on the wing design, but it was also kind of intended. I did want to keep that simplistic feeling. The next thing to do was to re-add the spines to the back of the head and the spine around the hips. Now, I got rid of those entirely because the Spore variant of them, they did not translate very well in Dynamesh or into the imports. They just looked really bizarre. I would have just preferred to have redrawn them from scratch. So all I did for that was I masked out a line, inverted said mask, and pulled that line out, and then just using the move tool, just kind of moved things around a little bit, created like these little pointed edges and curvature downwards. Got the clay polish tool, defined the spines into it, and as you can see here, it kind of looks quite alright in the end. It's a bit more complex compared to the rest of the model, but it's also a very small detail or a very small feature, and I think it's quite easily hidden. And like I said, it just looks better than the initial Spore exported variant. Then after doing the spines and after adding in some little custom teeth, the next part was the colours. So for the coloration, I did again aim to go something a bit more simple. Well, that was the aim. I kind of didn't do that in the end. So for the material, I went with Skin Shade 4, I believe, which is like a very nice, bright and bold material. Really does a good job of emphasizing all the coloration as well as defining all the shadows and edges. And then just basically tried to paint this similarly to the creation. Not literally, because again, with Spore, you get a lot of features that are just very strangely coloured, such as reptilian mouths are always very kind of grossly pink and grey. Same with the hands and the feet as well. A lot of colours just become very washed out, very weird in translation and gradients and such. Skipped all of that. In the end, I made the model very heavily referenced to the creation, so a lot of the patterning and such as the red around the back, I tried to keep that intact, as well as the gradients on the feathered wings as well. But otherwise, had a lot of creative liberties with this one. Just added a lot of different hues and tones wherever I wanted to. And then towards the end, as I started adding the red in, the red kind of felt a little bit out of place, especially around the spine as well, because the spine on the creation was orange and yellow. And I couldn't exactly add the red onto that, so when I added the red around it looked kind of weird. So in the end, I did kind of bleed in like very pale shades of red all around the creation, tried to make it just transition a bit better, look a bit less out of place. And after a while, then I just did what I always really enjoyed doing with textures and just chose a whole bunch of different alphas and basically just went crazy on it. So you'll see towards the end how right now the colorations are very, very smooth, very polished, but as I go on forward and I start playing around with all the different alphas and such, you just got like all these different scales, different markings, different lines and veins and spots and everything all over the place. Absolutely overkill, but like I said, it was just a fun little silly sculpt, something I just wanted to make for the fun of it, and that does of course involve just sheer experimenting, improvising, just doing silly things just for the creative fun of it. Now, towards the end of the creation, as the coloration was finished, I really liked the colours and I really liked how it looks, but I was very torn. I didn't know whether to leave it as this, you know, very smoothly shaped creature, which I did, to be fair, quite liked, or if I added a bunch of scales to it. And in the end, I decided, let's go all out, let's just add some scales. Normally I'd add the scales before the coloration because I find that it can kind of distract from the colours quite a bit if you do it afterwards. So I did go backwards with this one, but again it was meant to be like a very simple thing, so my scale placement was very random, using a lot of alphas to do, you know, 90% of the work for me. And just placed it at basically wherever I wanted to, varying shapes and lengths and sizes. And just piece them all together, and in the end I actually quite like it. I do think it looks a lot better with the scales. It's definitely very rough, but I think it looks a lot better. And in the end, for the final creation itself, at least in my opinion, I think it does still have that Spore charm. You can see it's definitely, you know, some big feathered raptor, but you can also see it's very clearly kind of like characterized in a way. It looks very cartoonish, but not terribly cartoonish. I think it's quite a nice balance in between, and like I said, I'm just really happy with it. I thought it'd be like a nice, silly, fun exercise. It came out really well in the end, and when I added in my little pedestal for it to sit on, it really looks like a figurine, and I really, really wish I could get it printed. Just like those really old Spore models that people used to print out, especially in Max's a long time ago. It really reminds me of that, just a more HD version, and personally, I'm really, really happy with it. I would definitely like to do more of these in the future, and like I said, one of the main reasons I enjoyed doing this is because 1, it was very laid back and simple, and 2, this is absolutely something that you guys could do as well. As I said earlier, the method I used of which to export Spore into ZBrush, I will link that in the video description down below. The guide is for Blender, but it works with ZBrush as well. So you can definitely do the same. And otherwise, that about wraps up this creation, or this model in fact. Really enjoyed it, really had a fun time. It's good just doing something very laid back and simple every now and then. And yeah, it was really fun, and I really do like the end result, and I hope that you guys do as well. As always, thank you all so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope you feel inspired to try your own all, you know, HD Spore creations. I really hope you guys enjoyed this, I hope you learned something, and I really hope it's motivated you or inspired you to try your own all HD Spore models. I really would recommend it, it's a lot of fun. And as always, I will catch you all next time. Have a wonderful day, and cheers.